Can I use your phone?
My phone?
Can I use your phone?
Hey, bro, I ain't got my phone on me, brother.
You ain't got your phone on you?
No, you dropped yours in the grass right back there.
Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime. Paul Murdoch is, in a very real sense, the story of his father and of the beginning and end of the Murdoch dynasty set on fast forward. Through Paul, we also get a sense of where and how and when and why the temptation to deceive first takes root. It sketches out those dynamics in quite a lot of detail. So if you want to understand how Alex Murdoch became Alex Murdoch, the nuts and bolts of it, the deeper psychology of it, that process, well, the boat incident gives you a real-life parable for how some of those mechanisms work out in motion, how a Murdoch screws up, how he breaks the law, and then how other Murdochs rally around their own while using the law to protect themselves and blame others. Additionally, Paul also provides a fascinating, if disturbing, portrait, an allegory, if you will, for how the culture or the inner circle surrounding the Murdochs behaves. Right? And now you may say, not the boat incident again. We know the boat incident through and through, inside and out. Well, we're going to use the boat incident in order to roll back time, not only as an insight into Paul's psychology, also the mother-son dynamics, the father-son dynamics, the brother-sibling dynamics, and what exactly is the chip on Paul's shoulder. And then through all of that, through that entire process, we want to know what's the chip on Paul's shoulder, and so does that give us a clue as to what the chip is on Alex's shoulder? When you supposedly have all the money in the world to start off with. But before we get to that, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do. Thank you to the many of you who have subscribed. Welcome to the channel. If you don't know me, I'm the author of dozens of true crime books. You can check out my books on Amazon. I'll put a link to that in the description. If you're enjoying this episode, please hit the like button. You can like, share, leave a comment, and also hit the thanks button. And let's get started. So in this analysis, we're going to get some additional insights from the Investigation Discovery docuseries, a three-parter that came out in the summer of 2022. You may remember in the early analysis on this channel that we looked at insights from the HBO docuseries as well as insights from the Netflix docuseries dealing with the Murdoch dynasty. Now we're going to examine the boat incident through Investigation Discovery's coverage. Although I feel ID's coverage is the weakest of the three, possibly because successive docuseries fine-tune their analysis based on improving what had gone before, but then also taking the lead on the previous one, it is nevertheless, I think it provides the best narrative of the boat incident on its own. For example, it made clear where the boat incident starts. Did you know that it started at Paul's grandfather's posh riverside house? He didn't drive from home and just, use some kind of generic boat ramp. He used his grandfather's riverside house. And that would also have been where they would have slept over. And that would have been the aftermath to the oyster roast. And I think the idea was that all 6 kids would document their night out on social media to really kind of be a boast fest from beginning to end, as if to say, look how much fun we're having. In other words, part of the motive for going to the oyster roast by boat was to sort of brag about it from beginning to end, brag about their social status, brag about their access to privilege. And so what is astonishing between the 3 docuseries is that each digs up completely new and different footage compared to the other. There's some nugget that you haven't seen before in the Investigation Discovery series as well, whether it's audio, crime scene footage, body cam, news reports, etc. And of course, what happens, as we know, everyone gets drunk, not just Paul, but Paul becomes by far the most intoxicated and then also belligerent, and that is when Timmy emerges. Timmy, who is underage, breaks the law by not only drinking excessively, extremely excessively, but driving under the influence. And when he's finally tested, he's found to be 3 times over the legal limit. If they tested him right in the beginning, who knows, maybe it would have been 4 or 5 times over the legal limit. Anyway, the critical insight is that Paul, who has broken the law, and he's basically responsible for Mallory's death far more than anyone else. What does he do? He first calls his grandfather. It's like a default setting. He knows to do it. He knows this is a loophole. He knows this is his way out. Not only, he doesn't call his father, he calls Randolph, a.k.a. Handsome, who is basically an ex-district attorney for Hampton County, and more powerful and influential probably than his own father. And then this is the critical point. This is the moment of truth. Well, the moment of truth ends up being a lie. Paul lies to his grandfather and pins the whole thing on Connor Cook, a.k.a. Cotton. That is a critical psychological aspect. Firstly, that Paul lies so easily, so instinctively, and secondly, that he knows exactly the process to get himself out of a serious jam. Well, it's really a fuck-up of his own making, to call it plainly, to put it bluntly. So where did he learn that? Where did he learn that technique for getting himself out of a situation? And why on earth would his own family believe him that he wasn't driving his own boat, given his personality, given how they find him at the scene? Because when it came to the brand of law the Murdochs appeared to be practicing by the summer of 2019, was it about truth? Or was truth merely an inconvenience to be brushed aside? And so what's astonishing here is you have father and son on the scene in cahoots in the form of Paul and Alex, and then you also have Alex and his father on the scene in cahoots as well, basically all caught up in a scheme to pin the whole thing on Connor Cook. In other words, if Paul learned to lie and lean on the Murdoch law firm, but specifically the most powerful entity there, he learned that from his father, and Alex seemed to learn that from his father. In other words, the deceit and entitlement is so entrenched, it's become innate. It's become a default setting. And now we're going to deal with how the culture or the inner circle surrounding the Murdochs behaves. And we get an idea from that again from the allegory of the boat incident. So what's staggeringly easy to miss in the scheme of the boat incident is that there are 6 kids on the boat. All of them are underage. They're all between 18 and 20. There are 2 other males besides Paul, and one, Anthony, is clearly bigger and stronger than Paul. So how does Paul end up getting his way? How does he end up driving? How does he end up doing what I guess none of the others want? Think about it. Paul is essentially outnumbered 5-1. And yet Paul nevertheless is allowed to have his way. He gets to do things his way. If the other 5 in the boat had insisted, if they'd been absolutely insistent, there was no way Paul could have resisted in the state he was in, and he could have easily been overpowered. So they could have taken over. There could have been a kind of a mutiny, put it that way. So why wasn't there? And so it's interesting that Anthony tells the cops in the aftermath to the incident that he begged and begged and begged Paul to let him take the wheel. Remember that.
Hey, I'm with Department of Natural Resources. Who was driving the boat?
Right, y'all picked up.
The last time I grabbed my girlfriend and got down in the bottom of the boat, Paul was driving.
Paul was driving?
Yes. I begged and begged and begged and begged to let me drive.
Uh-huh.
But what this really shows is also the power that Paul wielded, whether sober or not, whether in his Timmy alter ego, in his Timmy state or not. Whether that was the case or not, the 5 passengers in the boat accepted that if they wanted their social media blitzkrieg, they were going to have to schmooze up to Richie Rich and allow Paw Paw to do as he pleased, even if he was behaving totally unacceptably and dangerously. There's also a sense that before Paul's murder, the Murdoch influence had actually found its mark. As far as I'm aware, Connor Cook was either convinced at some point to go along with a sort of ruse to say that he did drive the boat, or at least that he couldn't remember, or that he didn't know, or that at least some passengers, I think at least 3 of the passengers, would ultimately dispute that Paul was driving in some way. In any event, while he was alive, Paul was protected and got away with the boat incident. In fact, Alex's very own lawyers who represented him unsuccessfully at his double murder trial represented his son Paul in his court appearance. And that brings us to the father-son dynamic. We see additional allegory in the boat incident where Paul is abusing some substance, in this case alcohol. He becomes someone else, he does something wrong, he makes a mess, he kills someone. All the while he's also harassing or flirting with hospital staff, basically in the aftermath. Like he's not really aware of reality. He's also enjoying special treatment within that whole emergency situation from the cops in the form of his own ambulance and police escort. Paul also allegedly slapped or struck his girlfriend immediately prior to the crash in the boat, which suggests if father is like son, the rumors we heard of Alex's eyes turning black when he was intimate indicates that there is a shadow self. It seems to be kind of a Murdoch trait in terms of Paul and Alex. Do you agree with that? So if Paul could become Timmy, couldn't Alex become, well, let's call him the Goblin King? And if father and son had a dangerous and dark alter ego, what about their grandfather? What about Handsome? Did he have a dark alter ego as well? And so just 2 summers after the boat incident, we saw Alex explode with that same aggressive violence we saw from Paul against those closest to him in that case. And so the question is, hadn't Paul seen that violence as well? Was that what happened to the housekeeper? Anyway, the dangerous thing that we see that was starting to form, to fester and stew within the Murdoch dynasty was a dangerous lack of attachment to the real world and reality. Can you see that? It was there to begin with because of the level of wealth and privilege and everything else. It was there to begin with, this lack of attachment to the real world in a sense. But then drugs and alcohol made that sense of dominance and preeminence even more real. In other words, it made the reality even less real than it already was. And so within the fogs and distortions of intoxication, that distance with reality and the forces of gravity seems to get broken. And I mean, isn't that what they want? They want to be intoxicated with their own preeminence, which is another word for superiority or power. So even though there's a lust for power, it amounts to greed. Greed can also be greed for power. Greed for simply more. Meanwhile, when they colored over legal lines, as they invariably did, the Murdoch dynasty could always act as a sort of safety net, providing freedom from consequences, freedom from accountability. That was the plan.
Not a great plan.
So if you plan to run the longest legal dynasty in America, not by defending the law or prosecuting the law, but by bending and breaking it, and ultimately turning it into a shit show, then I don't know, I tend to think it's not a great plan. And so that then brings up this question, if there was a chip on Paul's shoulder, was it the same chip on Alex's shoulder? And then what is that chip? What is driving the greed? What is driving the aggression? Well, the answer is that greed is driven by deep, unmet emotional needs. Let me say that again. Greed, selfishness, is driven by deep, unmet emotional needs. And entitlement is as well. That sense of entitlement is also driven by deep, unmet emotional needs. Entitlement in this sense is an over-attachment to things, way beyond the norm. And obviously, when that over-attachment becomes extreme, where things become more important than people, or put otherwise, people are merely a means to an end, well then, things are disposable, and then people are disposable. And that is how you end up with murder. double murder in this case. So I am going to take it further than that, not in this episode, but I'm going to explore in more detail, basically in a part 2 to this, the mother-son dynamic, the brother dynamic, and also the role of hunting in the Murdoch family culture and what sort of role that has. And then again, we want to think about this idea of what is driving the aggression, even beyond deep, unmet emotional needs. So look out for the next episode, part 2 in this series. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.